Yee-haw!
Welcome back to Hillbilly History, where we tell the long-forgotten tales of southeastern Kentucky and the surrounding area. I'm Tiffany, and I will be your storyteller today. Today's episode is all about the 1911 feud at the Paint Creek Church in Williamsburg, Kentucky. If you enjoy learning about history, please consider supporting our efforts by making a donation to the Corbin Library. It's easy. Go to CorbinKYLibrary.org. That's Corbin with a C like cat. CorbinKYLibrary.org. Scroll down and click on the donate button. Every donation, large or small, helps us continue to bring history alive. We are taping at the library in beautiful downtown Corbin, Kentucky. And our special guest today is Roger.
Hello, hello.
Hey, Roger, how are you today?
Doing good today. How about you?
I am well. Roger, for our guest, let's talk about you. So, are you from Corbin?
Yes, I've lived here my whole life, actually. I've been here since 1969 when I was born, and I've never left, you know.
You've just...
I visited other states and things like that, but as far as saying I'm staying at home or this is my home place, this is where I've stayed.
What do you like about Kentucky?
Well, I like the hills, plenty of streams. I like a lot of hunting, fishing, and the people here are great. I mean, you can about go anywhere and, hey, how you doing? You know, back and forth with each other, and somebody's always willing to lend a hand, you know, to help you.
Well, today we're going to talk about a feud that took place in 1911, and I know that 1911 is a very important year for you and for my husband and many of our listeners. Why is 1911 an important year for you?
Well, one thing is that was the invention of the 1911 automatic pistol, which is still in production now, and it's one of the greatest pistols ever designed back in that era.
So the 1911 pistol is arguably, even today, the most popular. And it was originally designed for war to be something that was more reliable.
Yeah, and it's still popular today like it was then. It was real popular back then, but it's like it's probably grown. And I'd say more than half of people that carry or own firearms has one.
Oh, for sure.
Oh,
they're so popular.
And, you know, they may be more than that. I'm just, you know, off my head, maybe. But, you know, I never have really looked into it to, you know, the actual amount, you know, that was, or the statistics. I can't really say that. Tell I'm a country boy.
Thank God I'm a country boy.
But, yeah.
Now, in 1911, the first Hollywood studio opened in California, and Crisco was invented, you know, the grease that you use for cooking. And catalogs were super popular. So Sears and Roebuck, you could order a house and have it delivered, and it was like IKEA. You could assemble it yourself on site. Manufacturing was really taking off in the United States. You were talking about cars. There were approximately 500,000 cars on the road in the whole United States in 1911. So buses and streetcars were super popular. Obviously, our trains had been popular for quite some time. So everything was starting to move forward as far as innovation and what we consider now kind of normal. That was all starting to happen in 1911.
Yeah, and you know, you mentioned the Sears Roebuck catalog, and I know you're, especially in it. Well, a lot of Appalachia people in this region, they used Sears and Roebuck catalog when they went to the outhouse.
Yeah.
And that was, you know, one of the main, you know, things they had to use back then. You know it.
Yeah, most people didn't have indoor plumbing in 1911.
And they always say, be sure you got that Sears and Roebuck catalog.
Yeah, because it was so big.
Outhouse.
It had so many pages.
Oh, yeah. And, you know, it'd take a while to go through those. It depends on how big your family was and, you know, if you had problems, you know what I mean.
Well, today's story, we're talking about a couple of clans down in Williamsburg, almost to the Tennessee border. So it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. Now, the area where it took place is called Paint Creek back then. And it's also been referred to, I've heard, as Swain. That was one of the names of the people, Swain Holler. For our listeners who don't know, what is a holler?
Well, it's kind of a road, one way in and one way out, no outlet, and you drive most of them as far back in the hill. You have a hill on each side of you, a mountain actually, and most of the time when you do drive in the holler back there like that, and you'll know who started the little area or community, I guess, is at the head of it. You've ever heard of holler? Have you ever heard of that?
I've never
People
heard that.
around here knows what that means, and that's the house that's right at the end of it, basically. And then that's where they built their first house, like I mentioned. And then you'll have maybe a couple on, back coming out, as you're saying, or going in, you'll see them. And that'd be their family, kids, grandkids, or, some, siblings, whatever. They would just, and they would take, like a lot of those hollers would take like their name.
Right.
Like if their names was Jones, it'd be Jones Hollow. Mm-hmm. Well, it's holler, really. But
Yeah. We call it a holler.
it's holler, really.
So what's interesting about this story is it was a feud between the Gallamore clan and the Swain clan. And this is the first time that I've actually been able to track down and speak with some of the ancestors of the people in our story. So I actually got to talk to some of the Swain family, which was fascinating. And it was funny because when I talked to the person, their first reaction was, how in the world do you even know about this? And it's like, well, I do research at the library and I come across all these crazy stories. And I think these are fascinating and gripping tales. And is it okay if I share this on a podcast? And the person was like, yeah, that's fine, of course.
Yeah.
You had never heard the story before I brought it to your attention.
Right.
And so I said, okay, you're going to be the next guest. And so I mentioned the Swains and you said, wow, I know a Swain. I wonder if they're related. And it turns out they are. And then we got some information from the state archives and we got to see who was on the jury. And lo and behold, one of your ancestors served on the jury.
Yes.
From Corbin, because it was all in the same county. Even though the trial took place in Williamsburg, your family was on the jury.
Just like I mentioned. See, you found something about me that made me interested in it. And see, I didn't know nothing about it.
Yeah, so you know the family. Your family was on the jury. It's part of your tale, too. And that's why I love this history, because it just brings everybody together. And it really is a community story. It doesn't belong to one person. The story is bigger than one family or two families. It's all of our history, really. Let's introduce our clans. We have the Gallamore clan. So we've got some brothers. We've got Albert, who is around 20. We've got Harrison, who is around 21. And we've got Mart. He was around 18 or 19. And I wasn't sure if Mart was actually a brother or cousin. He was a brother. His real name is Jesse, and that's what kind of threw me off. But in all the newspaper reports and even in some of the court documents, he is listed as Mart. So we're going to go ahead and call him Mart. Now, the Gallamore clan, from some of the census data, they were not actually from Kentucky. So the boys were born here, but their parents were from Ohio. And I wonder if this may have been part of the contention with the Swains that they weren't local. And sometimes when families from different places move into a holler that is predominantly a different family, you can have some skirmishes. And then we've got our next clan, the Swain clan. Now there's a lot of them. I'm not sure if they're all brothers or if some of them are cousins, but there was a lot of them. So we've got Bill Swain. He was around 28. Evan was around 25 years old. Millard was approximately 32 years old. James was 29. Harv was 25. And Dennis was our youngin'. He was 19. Now you can see the disparity in ages. So the Gallamore brothers were between 18 and 21, and the Swain brothers were between 19 and 32 years old. So I think we expect more out of the Swains just because they're a little bit older and have a little bit more experience in the world. Although back in those days, it's 1911, you're in a holler, you grow up quick.
Absolutely. That's what I was getting ready to say. You do.
You
You learn.
Yeah.
You learn things very fast. And you're taught things too, real young and you just take it with you. But
That's one thing I appreciate about the people around here. Me being a city slicker, if the electricity went off tomorrow
Right.
and wasn't coming back on, and the grocery store shut down, I would starve to death, and I would be banging on your door saying, "Roger, could you feed me? Because I don't know how."
but, that's true. We grew our gardens, kept it up. We would hunt and have deer and things like that, and always food.
Yeah.
And a lot, if you didn't grow it, there at your place, you would starve, like you're mentioning.
Well, you could forage. You, Roger, could actually go out and forage for food. Me, Tiffany, not so much. I would eat the poison mushroom and die. I don't know what you can eat and what you can't eat.
I started hunting when I was a young boy, 8 or 9.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have started earlier, but my dad didn't trust me with handling a firearm.
Mm-hmm.
And I was around that, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in that area. And and he trusted me. Then I started drifting off a little bit by myself.
Mm-hmm.
But he hunted with me when I was 10, probably 12, I guess. But then, he learned me, and just like these families,
Mm-hmm.
They learn one another how to do things like that.
People here are not stupid. And if there's anything that comes out of this podcast, I hope that that's what we get across, that the people here are not ignorant and they're not stupid.
And you go to a lot of places that's not in this area, and you'll say, "Oh, I'm from whatever." And they go, "Oh, you're a dumb hillbilly."
Mm-hmm.
That slang has been around for start of time, I guess.
Yeah.
But that is unreal, like you just mentioned. And I would rather I was grown up, learned, common sense. There's nothing wrong with having book sense and college degree and all that. But 9 times out of 10, if you don't have common sense, all them degrees and all that book sense will not let you survive.
Absolutely.
In the world.
Absolutely. You're so right.
Right. You can't. I mean, you got to reason things.
And
like
what I love about it is hillbilly was such a derogatory term, and a lot of the men that I've met here have taken it on as a sense of pride. Yes, I'm a hillbilly, and that means I'm actually smarter than you because you might have some book smarts, but I actually know how to survive and live.
Right.
So I really love that. And that was one of the reasons why we named the channel Hillbilly History.
Yeah.
Because there is a sense of pride in that word that, yes, we're from the hills and, we know how to do things you don't. So I just love how we kind of turned that around. So going back to our story, this took place at Paint Creek Church in Williamsburg, Kentucky, which again is near Jellicoe Creek. And it's sort of almost to the Tennessee border. It was a shootout at the church on July 2nd, 1911. Some of the newspaper reports talked about this long-standing feud between the Gallamores and the Swains. So when I was researching it, I found that in the summer of 1901, Bill Swain was charged with the stabbing of Harrison Gallamore with intent to kill. Now, those charges were dropped. And we don't know why or what the circumstances were for dropping the charges. Was it an accident? Did they just not have enough evidence? But it's interesting because in 1901, Bill Swain was 18 and Harrison was only around 10 or 11 years old. So when the newspapers talk about this long-standing feud, the catalyst may have been this stabbing. And it's weird, like, why is an 18-year-old having anything to do with a 10-year-old in this holler? What was going on? And unfortunately, we're never going to know, but special shout out and thanks to Lance at the Kentucky Archives because without the information he dug up for me, we never would have known about this earlier incident that took place 9 years before. So now we're going to fast forward to the summer of 1911, and the newspapers say a disturbance occurred at the Paint Creek Church. So now in June, so the month before, in June 18th, 1911, the Gallamores arrived at church and reportedly fired their pistols in opposition to the service. Now, the information about this is a little murky because we don't know if it was in the church or out of the church, or why exactly they fired. Was it the way the preaching or the hymns were sung, or was it because they didn't want to go to church with the Swains? We don't know, but there was some disturbance that happened 2 weeks before. So the conflict was already brewing between the Swains and the Gallamores. Now, there was eyewitness testimony from a man named T.J. Hudson, and he tells us that the week before this big shootout, he spoke with Albert Gallamore, and the conversation took place at the sawmill of Alvin White. So TJ tells us that Albert Gallamore told him that Evan Swain and Evan's mom and Rebecca Wilson were, quote unquote, out begging for Evan Swain's life. So clearly the Swains were out in the community, in the holler, trying to make peace, right? Like we don't want any trouble, and they did make an attempt at peace. But Albert Gallamore told TJ about this, them going out begging for their life, but that will do him no good. We are going back to Paint Creek Church next meeting time, and you would hear tell of the bloodiest goddamn Swain tale you ever heard. So if that's not a threat, I don't know what is.
Sounds like it.
He was, something is going to happen absolutely at church. So now we've already have a stabbing 9 years earlier, and we've got a shooting at the church 2 weeks prior, and we've got the Swains calling for peace. But that didn't happen. So on Sunday, July 2nd, 1911, it's hot in July, it's humid, it's muggy. Everybody's kind of bad-tempered in July here. July 2nd, 1911, Albert, Mart, and Harrison Gallamore came to the Paint Creek Church early in the morning, and at least 2 of them carried pistols on their person. Now, the Swain clan also arrived early, and they were armed and they were ready for the shootout. The trouble started when Mart Gallamore began shaking cartridge hulls and throwing some at the feet of Bill Swain. So I read this. I'm confused. I don't understand why anybody would shake spent cartridges and throw them at somebody's feet. I don't get it.
That was 1911. That's when the year that it was produced. And he could have had I'm just assuming here, he could have had, I've got a modernized pistol over yours. He could have had a percussion, with the percussion caps, the black powder, a lot of people know what is that. But he had the 1911 that, the shells was already made. However, he had the primer and everything. It was in a casing and loaded. All he had to do was shoot it. That was done.
Right.
He could have been boasting, hey, my ammo's better or my gun is better.
That makes sense because in some of the court documents, it says that the Swains used powder and lead balls. That was part of their charges, was what they used to kill some of the Gallamores. So that kind of makes sense that they had 2 different types of guns at the same time.
And also, those guns, the black powder ones, was not reliable. Mm-hmm. And, he had this is better stuff. And, like I said, he boasted about it.
Right.
So I think that's what really happened.
Right.
It seems like it anyway.
Right. So now we actually have some testimony that came from an affidavit. So we'll go through that. But remember, now the trouble's starting because Mart Gallamore is throwing spent casings at Bill Swain's feet. So Mart Gallamore says to Bill,
"That's what my gun shoots."
And Bill said,
"Is it?"
Mart said,
"Yes, by God, I can shoot some more if it's necessary."
And Bill said,
"Why don't you?"
Now Harrison Gallamore is getting into the fray.
By God, it's none too late. Let's just start it.
And Bill.
I've got nothing to start.
So Harv Swain enters the conversation. He's trying to be the voice of reason. And he said,
Hush, you don't have any trouble here. Bill, come on over here.
So he's trying to get Bill to walk over to him and away from all the trouble. And then Dennis Swain is trying to get peace.
Yes, Bill, come on and not have any trouble here.
And I think when they're saying here, they're talking about church, right? We are at church.
Right.
It's important to remember we are at church.
And that is the worst place to have a ruckus or anything.
Right.
And he knew it. You know,
right. They
hey,
are at church.
You know, this is the Lord's house. No. You know?
Right? Yeah. So Harrison Gallamore, he's not having it, and he's wanting this shootout to happen. So he says to Dennis,
What in the hell have you got to do with it, Dennis?
And Dennis replies,
Nothing, only I don't want any racket here.
And Harrison Gallamore is continuing to egg the others on.
Just start something.
And Bill, now he's getting mad. His temperature is rising and his temper he's losing control of it.
I don't have anything to start, but I am not afraid of you goddamn sons of bitches. Whoa.
I know, right? It's getting serious now.
Really heated.
So now everybody's upset. And at that time, Harrison Gallamore jabbed his hand in his bosom after his gun. But Bill Swain caught his arm and they were wrestling for the gun. Finally, Harrison Gallamore got loose from Bill Swain's grip and 2 shots rang out. Bill Swain, he was hit in the knee, and Harrison was also wounded. We don't know where he was hit, but he was wounded. Albert Gallamore had been sitting in the church, and he was right by the door. So in this little country church, and again, when we think of churches, we think of these big buildings. This is more Little House on the Prairie, a single room with some benches and maybe a pulpit. This is a little tiny church. So Albert is sitting in the church near the door. He hears the shots, and he runs down to where Harrison and Bill, they were in the road. And now he's pulling his pistol from his bosom. Well, Evan Swain saw Albert trying to draw his pistol, and he said, "Hey, don't do that." Well, Albert, he ignored Evan, and he continued to draw his gun. When Albert was about 6 or 8 feet away from the road, Evan Swain, he fired. And Albert was killed. It was reported that Albert Gallamore had his hand on his pistol when he fell. Now, we can presume, we don't know this for sure, but we can presume that James Swain shot and killed Mark Gallamore while all this ruckus was going on. Luke Meadows, an eyewitness, said that Harrison Gallamore told him that he was the cause of his brothers getting killed. Now, I don't know if that's because of the stabbing that happened 9 years before, or if it's because he's the one who got his brothers all riled up for this big shootout at the church. Unfortunately, we don't have the transcripts to get a full picture of what took place that day. But again, thank you to Lance at the Kentucky State Archives for finding the witness testimony that we do have. The Gallamores started a fight they couldn't win. They were outmanned, they were outgunned. And in my opinion, the conclusion of this firefight was inevitable. Only Harrison Gallamore survived. Now, Harrison eventually went on to serve in World War I, and he was killed in action in France just a few months before the war ended. So their father, Tandy, lost all of his sons by 1914. It's just so sad.
That was sad. That was really a tragic time.
Bill, Evan, Millard, James, Harv, and Dennis Swain were all charged for the murder of Albert and Mark Gallamore. Now, most of these cases ended up getting dismissed, but Evan and James did have to stand trial. So Evan and James were both found guilty of willful murder, and they were sentenced to not less than 2 years and not more than 21 years of hard labor at the state penitentiary.
Oh, gee. That made me think of a movie I used to watch, and a lot of people, it was Paul Newman. He's a great actor, and it was called Cool Hand Luke.
I remember that. Yeah.
People need to watch that. And we were talking about Hard Time, and he was doing Hard Time, and that could have been what they done. It don't really say what they done.
I don't know.
But like I just mentioned, that movie will show you a lot of things they done back then.
Yeah.
As far as Hard Time Penitentiary, that's what it was.
And they did only serve around 2 years because they were both paroled in 1914. So in a very ironic twist of fate, the Swain family and the Gallamore families are buried in the same cemetery, and it's right near the location where the Paint Creek Church once stood. So it seems that their bonds are eternal. I want to read an article from the New York Times and just get your reaction to it. So it says, the feuds in Kentucky mountains are not characteristic of Kentucky. I'd argue with that.
Yeah, that's
The 4 Swain brothers who battled last week with the 3 Gallamore brothers at Paint Creek Church in Whitley County and killed them during the sermon, it didn't happen during the sermon, are products of a narrow environment. They live in mountains that shut out the influences of civilization and limit the mental horizon of the backwoodsman. So basically, they're stupid. The state of Kentucky, as it increases in wealth, will pierce these borders of ignorance with highways, plant schools along them, and change the customs and usages of people whose English lineage is well defined and who are potentially good citizens. What do you think about that?
Oh my gosh. It's like a plague, or something for our community. They always downgraded us that was stupid and ignorant and didn't know what we was doing, and modern times have changed, and like they would like I mentioned earlier, they would still come and ask us things, and we'd do things like that. But the people that writes those stories didn't live it.
Mm-hmm.
They can get wherever they're getting their information at. Majority of that is not facts. It's just fiction basically. And like they need to come and talk to people that's lived it.
Right.
And that would change all this, how things was written down or documented. It wasn't really true stuff.
Right. Let me read you a story from the Washington Post, which I think is a bit more accurate. It is harder for those who live within the pale of law and order to understand than are any of the conditions which have ruled in the open countries for a century or more. The Kentucky mountains hold a citizenship that is still a law unto itself. They insist on settling their troubles in their own way. They appeal to the law of civilization, neither for guidance nor for protection. All they ask is to be left alone, to adjust their difficulties after their own fashion. Maybe it will be best to grant their wish. Someday, these feuds will come to an end, either through the extermination of the contending families, or else through the introduction of the spirit of civilization into the wilds of the laureled hills. There is this much to be said in their favor. They fight their battles among themselves, and they shoot so well that the innocent bystander, if he is neither too previous nor too premature, is in no danger of falling a victim to their scattering fire.
And, a lot of what you just read there, too, you only had maybe one sheriff, as it would be, I guess, and they would be afraid.
Oh, yeah.
If there was a ruckus like this, we're not going up in that holler and check them out, or we're not going to come to them and say, hey, what? Because they was afraid of getting killed themselves. You didn't mess with people.
Well, the Swains turned themselves in. They didn't.
And that is good about them, that they really did. I mean, that was the honest thing to do, and they didn't want no more bloodshed, basically. And that was good of those to do that, But
they didn't have to.
No.
They could have come out. I mean, there was nothing the law could have done.
Yeah.
short of calling in the state militia again, which the state militia was called in quite frequently in these parts to quell the unrest.
Oh, they was afraid too. You know they was.
So, I mean, if the Swains didn't want to come in, they didn't have to. But they
Right.
turned themselves in and said, yes, we shot him and we'll stand trial and we'll take our licks. I think it's kind of unfair that they were found guilty when the testimony is that they repeatedly tried to bring about some peace.
Right.
So I don't know if it's because the Gallamores were younger and the Swains, being a little bit older, should have had the common sense to walk away. And some of the older Swains were like, come on, let's walk away, let's walk away, let's walk away.
Yeah.
And the Swains were the first ones to fire. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's why. We'd have to ask your ancestor,
That's
Matt,
true.
why did you find them guilty?
Where they was older too, like that, they could have said, "Oh, they're just stupid kids. They're not grown up yet," which they was only 8, 10, 12 years older.
Yeah, they
And like
weren't
they
that
wasn't
old.
adults, they were just like, "Oh, them stupid kids don't know what they're talking about."
Right.
But and that does happen that way.
Right. So what do you think of the story overall, Roger?
Well, it's really interesting. Or the article there in the papers, whenever it was wrote, and like I said, they didn't really know what happened. They didn't know, or they didn't talk about it. But it sounds like that no one would really admit to why they done it.
Mm-hmm.
It's this family or that family, and it was like top secret stuff, and maybe that's why everybody just said forget it then, and luckily they turned themselves in.
Nobody asked why the feud started or what was the catalyst for the feud,
Yeah.
or were people held accountable? Did anybody go to prison? Nobody followed up on the story. And that's why I had to go to the state archives to find out what actually happened, because the newspaper didn't do their job. They didn't follow up. So they wanted the sensationalism of, oh, there was a shootout at a church.
Yeah.
But then the story ended there. We find the stories in the newspapers here at the library, and then we just sort of dive into it. We contact the state archives for more information, but it all starts at your local library. So everybody, please support your local library and consider going to CorbinKYLibrary.org to give us a donation. We would sure appreciate it. And thank you so much for our special guest, Roger.
Oh, I'm glad I could do it. Thank you all.